What happens when family secrets don't stay hidden? Joni Lamb has built her image for decades, carefully shaping her reputation in the spotlight. But now, her own son-in-law has made a shocking move that threatens to bring it all crashing down. The truth behind his actions is more explosive than anyone could imagine. And once it's out, there may be no turning back. Was this betrayal planned all along? Or is it the ultimate slip that could ruin everything? The story of the letter begins like any other family dispute, with one side speaking loudly while the other side is ignored. For years, Joni Lamb presented her version of events to the public with confidence. She stood on stages and on television, dismissing the accusations against Pete as false claims, pushed only by her son Jonathan and his wife Susie. According to her, the situation was simple. Jonathan and Susie were angry, they misunderstood things, and they were the only ones who saw a problem. That explanation was neat, easy to believe, and comforting for Daystar's loyal viewers. But reality has a way of breaking through, and it came in the form of a single letter. This letter was not written by an outsider, not by critics of Daystar, not even by anonymous sources. It came from the inside of the family, from someone Joni trusted deeply. It was her son-in-law, Jonathan Weiss, the husband of her daughter Rebecca. For anyone who had believed that Jonathan and Susie were simply bitter and alone in their accusations, the letter was a shocking twist. JW, as many called him, had written down his experiences and sent them directly to Daystar's board member. What he shared was not vague, not rumor, but first-hand observations that left no room for doubt. In the letter, JW described moments he had personally witnessed involving Pete and Jonathan and Susie's little daughter. According to people who read it, he was clear that what he saw troubled him deeply. It was not the innocent affection Joni had described in her public statements. It was not a misunderstanding. JW believed Pete's behavior crossed the line into inappropriate physical conduct. He wrote it plainly, without excuses. He said that, as an undergraduate at Yale, without any study schedule, he tried to attend a weekly theatrical thriller. He wrote it plainly, without excuse. For those who thought the scandal was based only on gossip, the letter showed that there was evidence from inside the family itself. What made the letter even more explosive was the timing. For months, Joni had stood firm in her claims that Jonathan and Susie were alone in their accusations. She painted a picture of a united family standing behind Pete. The letter ripped that image apart. It proved that more than one set of eyes had seen behavior that was troubling. It proved that Jonathan and Susie were not exaggerating or inventing their concerns. Someone else close to the Lamb family, a son-in-law who had nothing to gain by speaking out, was confirming what they had been saying all along. And yet, the letter never made it to the police. For reasons that remain unclear, JW and his attorney refused to hand over a copy when asked. This silence created even more questions. Why write something so detailed and then keep it locked away? Was it fear of the consequences? Pressure from within the family? A desire to protect the ministry, even while acknowledging the truth in private? Whatever the reason, the absence of that letter from official records allowed Daystar's public narrative to continue largely unchallenged for a time. Still, its existence could not be denied. Once word spread that JW had written down what he saw, the story changed forever. It was no longer about Jonathan and Susie versus the rest of the family. It was about a broken illusion of unity, about hidden evidence, and about the cost of protecting an institution at all costs. The letter revealed cracks in the carefully polished image Daystar wanted the world to see, and forced people to ask hard questions about what else might have been concealed, and how long the truth had been suppressed. The letter may not have been shouted from a stage or broadcast on television, but it carried more weight than any sermon. It showed that behind the official story, there was another, darker reality. One written not by enemies, but by family. That was the turning point. From that moment on, no one could honestly say the accusations were just the product of anger or resentment. The truth had been documented, and once it was on paper, it could never truly be erased. For a long time, Daystar presented a picture of the Lamb family that looked strong, united, and unbreakable. On television, on stage, and in official statements, the message was always the same. The family stood together, defending Pete, and only Jonathan and Susie were stirring up trouble. To the outside world, that image was easy to believe. After all, Daystar was not just a ministry but a polished media empire. Its leaders were experts at controlling appearances, and the idea of a family bound tightly together around faith and loyalty fit the brand perfectly. But behind the scenes, the cracks were already showing, even if they were carefully hidden. When Jonathan and Susie first raised concerns, they were immediately painted as outsiders. Joni said they were mistaken, bitter, and simply trying to hurt the ministry. Viewers were told that no one else in the family agreed with them. The united family narrative was powerful because it made Jonathan and Susie look like rebels against their own blood. Who would believe two people over an entire ministry and the rest of the Lamb family? It was a clever way to keep the story simple, clean, and easy to defend. But that story began to collapse the moment Jonathan Weiss, Joni's own son-in-law, put his thoughts into writing. JW wasn't a stranger. He wasn't a critic of Daystar. He was married to Joni's daughter, Rebecca, and part of the inner circle. His voice mattered because he had nothing to gain by siding with Jonathan and Susie unless he truly believed what he had witnessed was wrong. His letter quietly but powerfully dismantled the idea that the family was united. By describing moments he had seen himself, JW showed that more than one set of eyes had caught troubling behavior. The only Jonathan and Susie excuse no longer held up. The cracks widened further when people realized Rebecca, Joni's daughter, had also been aware of things that didn't sit right. If Rebecca and her husband were concerned, then the family unity that Joni spoke of so confidently was more illusion than reality. This wasn't a case of one rebellious son and his wife fighting against everyone else. This was something much more complicated. Parts of the family were deeply divided, and the disagreements were not just about hurt feelings, they were about a child's safety. Still, for years, Daystar worked hard to preserve the illusion. Every public appearance reinforced the idea of a strong family defending one another. Joni's interviews and statements painted a picture of a mother who had weighed everything carefully and stood firmly by Pete. She spoke as if nothing could shake her trust, and she implied that Jonathan and Susie were isolated and wrong. Many people accepted that version of events without question, especially since Jonathan and Susie were being cast aside, stripped of influence, and painted as bitter troublemakers. The cost of challenging the family publicly was steep, and most people close to the situation chose silence over conflict. But silence does not erase the truth, and the cracks grew harder to ignore. Once word of JW's letter spread, the story of unity began to sound hollow. People asked themselves why someone so close to Joni would feel the need to write such a letter at all if everything was fine. They wondered why it had never been given to police if the goal was to be transparent. The contradictions piled up. A family that claimed to be united, but insiders who clearly were not. Official statements that promised clarity, but hidden documents that told a very different story. The image of unity served a purpose. It kept the ministry's reputation intact and reassured supporters that nothing was wrong. But it also meant suppressing uncomfortable truths. Jonathan and Susie were made to look like villains for refusing to stay quiet, while others who once supported them, like JW and Rebecca, pulled back into silence. That silence wasn't because they stopped believing what they saw. It was because the pressure to protect the family and the ministry outweighed the courage to keep speaking. That pressure is what cracked the family from the inside out, even as the outside image looked polished and strong. By the time more details of the letter and other hidden accounts surfaced, the illusion of a united family had collapsed entirely. Viewers and supporters realized that what they had been shown on television was more performance than truth. Families are complicated, and no family under that kind of pressure stays perfectly aligned. Daystar's greatest mistake was pretending otherwise. When the truth came out, it didn't just expose Pete's behavior. It exposed the culture of silence, the manipulation of appearances, and the willingness to sacrifice honesty for the sake of image. The cracks in the family's story revealed something bigger than a disagreement. They showed how fragile trust can be when people try too hard to maintain control. Once those cracks appeared, no amount of speeches, interviews, or staged family photos could cover them again. Supporters were left questioning not just what really happened with Pete, but what else the family had been hiding for the sake of protecting Daystar. The polished picture of unity was gone, and in its place stood something far more human, messy, divided, and full of secrets that no press release could repair. From the beginning, Daystar worked hard to control the story. Every time accusations surfaced, the ministry had a statement ready. They were polished, carefully worded, and full of confidence. Joni Lamb, speaking on television and in interviews, insisted that her family was standing strong and that the accusations against Pete were lies. She told the world that only Jonathan and Susie had problems with him and that everyone else in the family stood united. To the public, it sounded convincing. After all, Why would a mother stand by someone unless she knew the truth was on her side? But as time passed, the gap between the truth and those official statements grew wider and harder to hide. At first, Daystar announced that Pete had been investigated and cleared, that he had fully cooperated with the police and that no evidence was found. They framed it as a victory, a sign that God himself had proven Pete innocent. Supporters clapped, prayed, and moved on, believing the matter was settled. But that was only the surface. The investigation had not been closed forever. It was only paused. Police admitted the case stalled because of the difficulty of interviewing a young child, not because Pete was free of suspicion. That crucial detail never made it into the official statements. Instead, the ministry presented a cleaner version of events, one that left no room for doubt. The truth, however, was much messier. Inside the family, things weren't nearly as simple as the press releases made them sound. Jonathan and Susie weren't the only ones who saw troubling behavior. Joni's own son-in-law, Jonathan Weiss, wrote a detailed letter describing things he had witnessed himself, moments that made him deeply uncomfortable. He wasn't guessing or passing along rumors. He wrote what he saw, in his own words, and sent it to the Daystar board. Helen says, his letter described hugs and kisses from Pete toward Jonathan and Susie's daughter that crossed a line. To him, it wasn't innocent affection. It was inappropriate, and he said so. Now compare that to the official line. Only Jonathan and Susie have complained. No one else has a problem. The family stands together. Both cannot be true. Either the family was united or someone else had spoken up. JW's letter proved the official narrative was misleading. The truth was that more than two people had concerns, and some of them were close to the very heart of the Lamb family. Even more telling was what happened to that letter. The police never got it. Despite being asked, JW and Rebecca stayed silent and kept the letter out of official hands. The public never heard about it until much later. Meanwhile, Daystar continued to tell its viewers that nothing was wrong, that all the noise came from just two bitter voices. Behind the scenes, evidence existed that contradicted those claims, but it was hidden away. The silence was just as important as the statements. Both were tools to keep the truth under control. This divide between what was said publicly and what was happening privately created an atmosphere of confusion and distrust. To many loyal supporters, Daystar's words sounded like certainty. They believed Joni when she insisted her son Jonathan was bitter and lying, but when the truth of JW's letter leaked out, that certainty crumbled. People realized they hadn't been given the full picture. They had been told a story that left out key facts, and that made them wonder what else might have been kept hidden. The official statements always painted Pete as a victim of lies and rumors. The truth, though, showed a family split, with more than one person worried about his behavior. The official story said the investigation was closed forever. The truth showed it reopened later, once again putting Pete under suspicion. The official story said Jonathan lost his position at Daystar for poor performance. The truth showed he was punished for refusing to stay silent and sign a non-disclosure agreement. The truth showed he was punished for refusing to stay silent and sign a non-disclosure agreement. Over and over, the gap between truth and statement widened. Each time, Daystar chose the version of events that would protect the ministry's image, even if that meant leaving out uncomfortable facts. To the outside world, it seemed like strength and unity. To those on the inside, it felt like betrayal. Truth was being sacrificed for reputation, and once that pattern became clear, no amount of polished words could fix the damage. The danger of official statements is that they sound final. They sound like the end of the story. But in this case, they were only carefully edited snapshots, designed to hide more than they revealed. The truth kept leaking out in small, stubborn ways. Through a letter, through private accounts, through whispers of a reopened investigation. And with every leak, the gap between truth and the official narrative became too big to ignore. In the end, the clash between truth and statements was not just about one man's behavior. It was about power, loyalty, and image. It was about a ministry choosing to protect itself instead of facing what was happening within its own family. For supporters who believed every official word, the realization that they had been misled was devastating. For Jonathan and Susie, it was proof of how far their family would go to silence them. And for the rest of the Lamb family, it showed the high cost of staying quiet. The truth doesn't always come out in grand speeches or official reports. Sometimes it appears in hidden letters, in reluctant testimonies, or in the cracks that statements cannot cover forever. In the case of Daystar, the truth and the official story were never the same thing, and once people began to see the difference, the polished image of a united family and a flawless ministry could never look the same again. Silence can feel safe. It can feel like the easiest path when trouble is brewing and the walls start closing in. Inside Daystar, silence became more than a choice. It became a survival tactic. People close to the Lamb family realized quickly that speaking up came with a heavy price: losing a job, losing respect, losing relationships that once felt unshakable. These were not small risks, and in a world where power and reputation meant everything, silence became the currency that held the empire together. Jonathan and Susie Lamb were the ones who broke that silence. When they said they had found Pete in their daughter's room and confronted Joni about it, the reaction was not what most parents would expect. Instead of rushing to protect the child, the focus shifted to protecting the ministry. Suddenly, Jonathan and Susie weren't just family members, they were viewed as a threat. The moment they spoke, they crossed a line. From then on, silence wasn't just encouraged, it was demanded. And they refused. That refusal cost them dearly. Jobs disappeared. Jonathan was quietly pushed out of his role, with poor performance given as the excuse. In reality, he had refused to sign a non-disclosure agreement that would have muzzled him for good. By saying no, he gave up a career, a paycheck, and a future inside the ministry his family built. Susie stood by him, knowing full well that siding with her husband meant turning her back on financial stability and family approval. It wasn't just a professional loss, it was personal exile. Meanwhile, others inside the circle chose a different path. Jonathan Weiss, Joni's son-in-law, saw troubling behavior and even documented it in his now infamous letter. He had been ready to stand with Jonathan and Susie at first. He had written down his account, described the hugs and kisses that seemed far too intimate, and planned to support them in court. But then came the silence. The letter never made it to the police. JW and his wife Rebecca stayed quiet. Whether it was pressure from family, fear of losing their place in the ministry, or the overwhelming weight of what it meant to turn against Joni, they decided not to push further. Their silence bought them safety, but at the cost of truth. This is how power works in tight-knit organizations. It doesn't need loud threats. It doesn't always come with ultimatums shouted in someone's face. Instead, it seeps into the air, shaping decisions through unspoken expectations. Speak up and you will lose everything. Stay quiet and you'll be safe. That was the deal, even if no one ever said it out loud. And when the stakes include not just your job, but your reputation, your friendships, your place in the church community, the pressure to stay silent becomes almost impossible to resist. But silence isn't free. It carries its own cost. For Jonathan and Susie, breaking silence meant losing their careers and being painted as liars, traitors, even enemies of the faith. For those who stayed quiet, the cost was different but just as heavy. They had to live with the knowledge that their silence left a child unprotected, that they allowed the ministry to tell half-truths while hiding full ones. The burden of knowing but not acting has its own way of eating at people over time. Daystar as an institution benefited the most from silence. With so many powerful connections, politicians, pastors, wealthy donors, the Lamb family could present a polished image to the world. Official statements framed the situation as a bitter feud between Jonathan, Susie, and Pete, nothing more. And because the rest of the family didn't speak up, that story held together. To the viewers at home, the Lambs looked united. To insiders, the silence was deafening. Power thrives on silence because it keeps the truth hidden. The ministry could continue operating, raising money and broadcasting to millions while the messy reality stayed behind closed doors. But this kind of silence is never permanent. The cracks always begin to show. Letters leak, court documents surface, family rifts grow too wide to hide. Every time the truth peeked through, it became harder for Daystar to keep the lid on the story. The cost of truth when it finally comes out is always high. Jonathan and Susie paid with their future inside the ministry. Joni paid with her reputation, once the image of strength and unity now questioned by those who once trusted her. Pete's name, no matter how many statements cleared him, will always carry suspicion. And for the ministry itself, the cost is trust. Once people realize they weren't told the whole story, it's almost impossible to win that trust back. What makes this story so painful is the human side of it. Behind the headlines, it wasn't just about a ministry. It was about a family. Parents and children, siblings and spouses, torn apart by the choice between silence and truth. Some chose silence to protect what they had. Some chose truth and lost almost everything. The tension between those two choices is what has kept this story alive long after the first accusation. Silence, power, and truth are always at war in situations like this. Silence protects power. Truth destroys it, and those caught in the middle must decide what matters more, safety or honesty. For Jonathan and Susie, the cost of silence was too heavy to bear. They chose truth, even though it broke their lives apart. For others, silence felt safer in the moment, but it left scars that may never fully heal. In the end, the story of Daystar isn't just about a scandal. It's about the heavy price people pay when truth collides with power. Silence can hold for a time, but it always comes with consequences. And when the truth finally breaks through, no amount of money, influence, or polished statements can undo the damage that silence allowed to grow.